So, Shaun, let's get to part 2 of today's show, and that is going to be looking at this Notre Dame offense as it heads into year 2 and what we think, what expectations should be for this Notre Dame offense going into year 2. And there's a lot of things that go into it. I mean, who's the new quarterback going to be? What's the offensive line going to look like? Who steps up a receiver? How will the new guys at receiver look? Can the running back room kind of build on what they did in year 2? Who's going to the tight end going to be? You know, I mean, you're going to have not only a new starter, but whoever your new starter is going to be a very different quarterback than style of play wise than the kid you had last year. I would argue that there's better defenses on the schedule this year than there was last year. There's a lot of things that kind of go into it about, you know, how they can do in year 2. But Shaun, when I look at this conversation, I have a lot more optimism than maybe most when you ask the question, can Notre Dame, a team that went 14-2 and made it all the way to the college football national championship game, can that team be better on offense in year 2? Can they improve their passing game, which is the area that needs the biggest jump? Can they become more efficient in the running game? Like the run game numbers look great, 200 yards a game, you know, over 6 yards a carry. But a lot of that was built on 90-yard touchdowns, 70-yard touchdowns, 60-yard touchdowns that really made this an incredibly gifted and explosive running back room, a running back room that can certainly put the highlight reels together, but can they be efficient? We talked about, even Jeremiah Love was talking about that in his press conference the other day about how he's trying to be I don't think he word to use the efficient, but just a more sound player that can do the little things a bit better. Can they do that with a first-year starting quarterback? And the thing that I like, Shaun, is like, okay, we can give our opinion about whatever reason, but the question is, do they have a coaching staff in place that knows how to lead this type of offense to better heights? And so what that led me to do last week was start to look at the numbers and start to study. What has Mike Denbrock done in year 2? Because I can tell you all I want, Shaun, that here's why I think they're going to be better. But if they don't have the people in place to lead them to that success, then it's not going to happen. And so what I want to focus on here is, let's look at Denbrock's history. Let's talk about why it may be the way that it is, and then how this applies to the Notre Dame team when you go into 2022 or 2025. And so what we did is we went back and looked at year 1. So this is Mike Denbrock's 4th offensive coordinator job. It's a repeat of his first, so it's different. It counts as 4. He was Notre Dame offensive coordinator from 2014 to 2016. He was the Cincinnati offensive coordinator from 2017 to 2021. And he was the offensive coordinator at LSU in 22 and 23. So, and now he's obviously was at Notre Dame 24, and we're going into year 2. So the conversation that we had, or the data that we wanted to look up, is how did these Mike Denbrock offenses do in year 2? And so we pulled up the numbers. And my gut, feeling of like, okay, having followed obviously Notre Dame, but then other teams, was I feel like they get better, but how much better? So we pulled up the numbers, Shaun, and what the numbers showed us, and we're going to pull them up here in a second, is across the board, Mike Denbrock has shown, no matter the circumstance, and we'll get into this, in the second year of the Mike Denbrock offense, you're going to score more points, you're going to go for more yards, and you're going to go for more yards per play. And every single season, we have seen that, no matter the circumstance. And that big picture should give Notre Dame fans a lot of reason for optimism about his ability to grow. And when you look at the specifics of it, Shaun, you start getting real fired up about what they can do.
Oh, I was waiting for you to put. I thought you were about to put the graphic up. That's why.
No. I'm bringing it up while you start to talk.
Okay, but no, I think what we see before is you talked about the improvement in year 2. On average, we're talking about 9 points per game improvement offensively in the second year, and then a ranking improvement of 38 spots per year. You know, looking at these graphics, so you know it's pretty safe to assume. The only difference is at LSU and Cincinnati, he had a returning quarterback for a second year as well. No, I think
No, he
LSU
didn't.
was returning
Only
quarterback.
LSU.
Cincinnati, you're
Only
right.
LSU. They went from
And
Hayden Moore to Desmond Ritter in year 1 to
Desmond
year
Ritter,
2.
right. So you lean more on the Cincinnati experience than having a guy that will eventually be the Heisman Trophy winner, which
Right.
was astounding because what we saw from him at Arizona State and his transfer to LSU, even in his first year, towards the end of the year, that led into how he propelled that offense. It led that offense to what is a historical offensive year in LSU. Even going back and looking at what Joe Burrow was able to do in 2019, you have to be impressed with Mike Denbrock being able to be the guy, taking that talent, having Brian Thomas,
Right.
having Malik Neighbors. Yes, of course, he had elite talent, but he knew how to get the best out of that talent. So you look at the Cincinnati situation, I would venture to say skill wise is probably out of all, let's say the LSU situation, the Cincinnati situation of 17 to 18, and the last 2 years of Notre Dame. Which would you say is the least talented at the skill position?
Cincinnati by a
I would
lot.
agree. I would agree.
Yeah.
And so for him to improve that offense in his second year with Desmond Ritter to 14 points per game, and we talking about what, 88 spots in national ranking offensively, Mike Denbrock knows what he's doing. The simple fact that in the middle of the season, he was able to redirect the offense last year to be able to win the way Notre Dame had to win shows you that he has the ability to construct a plan, but then adapt when things don't go as it's scripted. So that speaks to Mike Denbrock. But now we're coming into a season that's going to be very interesting, just like in Cincinnati, where he has a new quarterback, but those quarterbacks, correct me if I'm wrong, because Desmond Ritter was still there, even
He
though he
was
wasn't
there in year
starting.
1. Yeah.
Yes, he
Yeah.
was
Desmond
there.
Ritter, right. He did not start as a true freshman.
Right. So that speaks
at
to
Cincinnati.
his situation now, where these guys, whoever wins is going to be a first-time starter, but they've been in the system with Mike Denbrock for a year. They were there. Right. So you can kind of lean on that to say, yo, this is why you feel like the Notre Dame offense can take a step forward in year 2 of Mike Denbrock.
Right. You look at these numbers, Shaun, and there's a lot of different ways you can spin it. Well, they had Jaden Daniels. Oh, okay, fair. They had Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. They also had Keyshawn Boutte in 2022. Didn't have him in 2023. But the point is okay, so in that scenario, what are we saying? What allowed him with the same exact players to go from 34.5 points per game to 45.5 points per game, from 453 yards per game to 6.4 yards per play, which are both still they were top 30 across the board in those categories, to 543.5 yards per game and then 8.4 yards per play. We had great players. We had great players in year 1, too. So what was it about having those great players that allowed them to do that? And that's kind of part of what we're going to discuss, is what allowed them to go to make the jump. And not only that, but then also make a jump from the year before. That's the other thing, too, is it's not like in either of those situations, he walked into great situations where they had proven success. So when you look at LSU in 2021, the year before he arrived, they were scoring 26.5 points per game, and they only had 368.5 yards per game and then 5.4 yards per play. And then you see the jump they made in year 1. Now, Notre Dame, they had a much better situation. I would argue Notre Dame was more efficient this year. They didn't have the high numbers of yards per play, yards per game, and then points that they had a year before. Played a much different schedule. Their points per game and their yards were almost identical to the year before, prior to the playoffs, when they played 4 great defenses, or the year before, they had 1 postseason game against the depleted Oregon State team. So you got to look at the context of those numbers. But you look at the way he did it there. Okay, well, he doesn't have Jaden Daniels at Notre Dame. He doesn't have a returning starter at Notre Dame this time. Okay, well, let's look at his Cincinnati job. They were going from a team that the year before Mike Denbrock arrived at Cincinnati, that was a team that really struggled on offense. They were averaging 19.3 points per game, and then they were averaging 374.1 yards per game. So they saw a slight up in scoring. You went down a little bit in yards, but you went up in yards per play. They were at 5.3. Actually, no, they went slightly down in that regard, 5.3. And then they get a new quarterback, go out in 2018 and make huge jumps in 2018. 14-point improvement. As you said, 88 spot ranking jump. You see a 106.7 yards per game jump and a 0.9 yards per play jump at Cincinnati. Then you look at Notre Dame. That's where they had the least improvement. They had a 4-point improvement in points, which is 1.4 average. They had a 21.5 per game average in yards per play, which was a 5-spot ranking. But then they had a big jump in yards per play, went from 6.1 to 7, and that jumped them from 32 to 6. A couple things about that Notre Dame improvement, which I think adds a lot of context and actually makes that one of his more impressive jobs, is from 2014 to 2015, you had a new quarterback, you had a new run, so that was something that was going to happen. Everett was being replaced by Malik Zaire. But before the second game of the year was done, Shaun, Notre Dame had lost their starting quarterback to a season-ending injury. They lost their starting running back on his third carry of the season, and they had lost their starting tight end and spent the rest of the year with a freshman as the primary tight end. And then in the last 4 games of the regular season, their starting running back also, their next running back got hurt, and they finished the year out with a true freshman at running back in Josh Adams, and then Dexter Williams were the running back. So, you look at that team, things did not go well. You lost your starting quarterback. You lost your starting running back. You lost your starting tight end, all before the second game of the year was over. You look at what that offense looked like in the one game where they were healthy from start to finish, and they annihilated Texas in that first game, Shaun. I mean, absolutely destroyed Texas in that first game. Still one of the best just single game offensive performances we've seen from a quarterback, just in all the metrics that you look at. Malik Zaire goes, I think, what was it, 8? I'm pulling up now, 18 of 21, and that 19 of 22 for 313 yards and 3 touchdowns. They ran for 214 yards. CJ Prosise, who had played receiver the year before, comes off the bench after Torian Folsom gets hurt. Him and Josh Adams combined for 147 yards on 25 carries and 2 touchdowns in that game. Will Fuller has a big game. Chris Brown you had 5 different guys catch at least 2 passes. 5 different guys have at least 31 yards receiving that game. And you annihilate Texas and only score 7 points in the second half. You were on the verge of absolutely rolling Virginia. So on the play after Malik got hurt, they scored to go up 26-14. Virginia started their comeback after that. And then, of course, Notre Dame held on to win. So when you look at that, they were on the verge. That offense was on the verge of being way more dynamic than what it even turned out to be. But even with all of that, you still saw improvement in year 2 with all those injuries with the new quarterback. So no matter the circumstances, and Cincinnati and Notre Dame, this is important context for Notre Dame. Each scenario, the starting quarterback for the all season, with the exception of Malik Zaire starting the first 2 games, but for the final 11 games, and for all of 2018 at Cincinnati, the starting quarterback was a redshirt freshman. Why does that matter? Because redshirt freshmen back then could not play at all in the season before. So, yes, you could say, well, he did this and that. But even with Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, they still saw a 10-point per game average with the same exact players. It's just talent isn't the reason that that's happening. It's you put that talent in position to be successful. Desmond Ridder is a more talented quarterback than Hayden Moore was. And so once you got the talent, you were able to put it in position to be more successful. 14-point per game average, over 100-yard per game average, 0.9 yards per play improvement. You had at least a 0.9 yards per play improvement at every school he has been. Think about what that's going to mean for Notre Dame if that trend continues, because all we know about Mike Denbrock is wherever he's been in year 2, they have a 0.9 yards per play average. So that means Notre Dame is going to do what next year? At least 7.2, because the baseline is 6.3. So, and that's the thing I look at, Shaun, and you start getting kind of excited about is there's every school that he's been at has had different circumstances he's had to navigate through in order to have the success that they had. 2017 to 2018 at Cincinnati, they have a completely different run game. And like, so this is like the overall stats, but let's get a little bit deeper, Shaun. Let's look at the run game stats. At least a 20 per. This is where you saw the most consistency. At least a 20 yards per game improvement everywhere. 21.8 at LSU with a 1.2 per play increase. You saw a over 100-yard rushing improvement at Cincinnati, jumped 85 spots, 0.8 yards per play better rushing. You see at Notre Dame, they had almost 50-yard improvement and a 1.3 yard per carry improvement for Notre Dame rushing the football. What you're also going to see at the end of the Notre Dame one is that's the one statistic where Notre Dame regressed, and a meaningful statistic was third down success, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that they didn't have they were the youth at quarterback created a lot of issues that year with Deshaun. So you see improvement in the run game, including one place that was already good at running the ball in LSU, that's the situation that's more in context with Notre Dame. The other two places they weren't good at running the ball when he got there. The year before, and this is a great statistic because everybody will say, well, Mike Denbrock loves to throw the football. And I'm sure Mike Denbrock does love to throw the football. The year before Mike Denbrock got to Cincinnati, the Bearcats averaged 118.2 yards per game rushing and 3.6 yards per carry. By his second season, they had jumped all the way up to 239.5, which is double what they were doing the year before he got there. And they went from 3.6 yards per play carry to 5.2. That's a very impressive statistic, Shaun. And then then let's go to the pass game. Improvement everywhere in the pass game. Now you say, well, they didn't improve in yards per game at Notre Dame. They weren't trying to throw for as many yards. But let's also remember that in the one game they had their starting quarterback from start to finish, they passed for 313 yards. But even though they went down in yards at Notre Dame, Shaun, they went way up in yards per attempt. They went over 10, almost 10 points higher in yards per or in efficiency. And they were also made a big jump in yards per catch. They were, I think, 13.4, and they jumped up to 14 in his second year in that offense. At LSU, we saw them go from 269.3 passing yards per game to 338.9 with the same exact players. 7.9 yards per attempt to 10.7 yards per attempt. And the Cincinnati success is fascinating because even though they had a 103.8 yards per game jump in rushing, they still went up almost 3 yards in passing, but they had a big jump in yards per attempt, 6.0 to 7.6, and they made about a 23-point jump in passing efficiency. They also went up in yards per catch that second year in Cincinnati as well. So the yards don't matter as much to me, Shaun, as the numbers that supplement the yards per attempt, yards per completion, efficiency. They also went up in completion percentage in every single spot, which is fascinating when you consider that Malik Zaire and Deshaun Kaiser completed passes at a higher rate than Everett Golson did in that second year under Mike Denbrock. I think that's something to point out as well. That just leads to, and then the fact that this is a team that in every discernible manner, except for one spot where they went down in third down, they improved across the board in every significant statistic that you can point to, with the exception of two: third down and then red zone percentage in Notre Dame in 2015 as well, because if you remember, Deshaun had a lot of red zone picks that year. But interception rate went down. All of it went down in year two under Mike Denbrock. No matter the circumstances, the specifics, the context of wherever he's been, they're all different. Sometimes you had returning starters, sometimes you didn't. All that stuff, and you saw the same thing happen everywhere. Improvement, 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 improvement. So what makes me think that they won't do the same thing at Notre Dame in year two under Mike Denbrock, especially, Shaun, since we started to see it happen at Notre Dame? They averaged 31 points per game in the first 4 games of the year. Offensive points, not team points, offensive points. Coming out of the bye, the last 8 games of the regular season, when they started to alter kind of the offense a little bit to fit the personnel, 39 points per game in the final 8 regular season games. Offensive points, not team, offensive points. And it just speaks volumes to one thing we know for a fact that Mike Denbrock knows how to do, Shaun, have his second-year offense be better than his first-year offense.
And I think it speaks to what you talked about. It's going to be a more efficient offense. And what do we mean by that? More than likely, it's going to be a more explosive offense. So I want to look at the numbers you put up when it talked about total yards per game. There were gains in the second year. You know, at LSU, 90 yards per game led to 10 more points per game. At Cincinnati, 100 yards per game led to 14 more points per game. And then the smallest connection to this is Notre Dame, where 22 more yards per game only led to 2 points per game, close to 2 points per game. So what does this mean?
It's about on average.
What does it mean? You put all of this into the calculator, and it means that Notre Dame can expect, or under Mike Denbrock, he has shown in his second year that his offenses, all it takes is 7.38 yards improvement to add 1 point to the point per game average. If Notre Dame gets 7 more yards per game, that's an extra point. That's what it averages out to between his 3 teams in that second year and the difference. So now what are we talking about? So if Notre Dame improves 50 yards per game, say 50 yards per game, that's 7 points or close to 7 points per game. If you add 50 yards per game, that's close to 7 points per game based upon what Mike Denbrock has done by the numbers. So, you know, you might think this explosion is going to be a bunch of extra yardage. No, man, it's the efficiency that you see in the second year that's going to lead to the points really jumping up. Not the just big jump in yardage, but the efficiency based upon the averages of his numbers that equals 1 point equals 7.38 yards when it comes to improvement in efficiency in the Mike Denbrock offense in the second year. And I think something else you pointed to that would lend itself to the explosion or the explosiveness of the offense. You talked about 2015. They're clicking on all cylinders against Texas. They go on the road. They're struggling early, and then all of a sudden they hit turbo. And next thing you know, they just fly past. They're about to blow Virginia out the water.
Malik hits that bomb over the top to Will Fuller, and then Malik goes on the long run. Right.
Malik gets hurt as they're entering the red zone to put more points on the board. And I think, I'm not mistaken, they ended up missing the field goal.
No. They scored on the very next play. They handed the ball off to CJ, and he ran it in for a touchdown.
They ran in for a touchdown. They go up. If they get the ball back,
it's 26-14.
They're hot now. Malik's probably going to lead them right back down the field because now he has a rhythm. He was out of rhythm early in the game. And so, as you know, that offense was going to be explosive. It was going to be an offense like you can hold us down early. You might be able to keep us in check. But once we get in rhythm, we're going to put up points in bunches. Yeah. And that's exactly what I would expect this offense to do and improve in the second year.
Yeah. I love what you're saying there, Shaun, because I don't believe that year 2 gets better just because you're more explosive. I think year 2, you become more explosive because you become more efficient. And that's really what it comes down to. I got some more numbers for you that I didn't put into the breakdown. I don't have the Notre Dame numbers because CFB Stats doesn't go back to 14 and 15, so I can only look at Cincinnati and LSU. In 2017, in year 1 at Cincinnati had 17 plays of 30 yards or more, 17. In year 2, that jumped to 45. In year 1 at LSU, they had 30 plays in 14 games of 30 yards or more. And in year 2, in 1 fewer game, they had 54. Same players. If you look at Notre Dame this year, when you look at 30-yard gains for Notre Dame this year, in 16 games, Notre Dame this season, Shaun, had 34 plays of 30 yards or more in 16 games. If you look at that and put it on a per-game basis and give them the same number of games they had at LSU, which is 14, they'd be at 30. Same exact number. But there's one difference between 2022 since LSU is the clock rules. that limit snap opportunities. So when you already think about this Notre Dame team is they're already explosive, much more explosive than that Cincinnati team. Very similar to how LSU was in 2022, because the one thing about LSU in 2022 is they could rip off some big plays now. I mean, that wasn't a concern for LSU in 2022. I mean, they were a top, a team that was pretty good at ripping off big plays. Notre Dame does that because of their run game. That was primarily driven by their run game, where those other teams was a little bit more balanced. And at Cincinnati, it was driven by their pass game because they were pretty terrible running the football. So Notre Dame is on par with what LSU was. Now you expect there to be more explosiveness, but I believe that explosiveness leads to efficiency leads to more explosiveness. I don't think explosiveness leads to efficiency. You can be efficient and explosive. I mean, if you are efficient, you're most likely going to be more explosive. But you can be explosive and not efficient, and that's what Notre Dame was this year. They were not an efficient offense. And so you ask, why do you think Notre Dame get better in year two? And that's kind of where we're going to go with this next part of the conversation, Shaun, as we kind of wrap this topic up, is so, okay, that's great. Those numbers are great. But why? Why is Mike Denbrock able to have that success? There's a couple facets to it. Number one is the players know the system better. Like, they know the offense better. They know what to do. That's why you started to see improvement from this team late in the year. I mean, think about this. The offense against Indiana, Georgia, Penn State, and Ohio State looked better than it did against Texas A&M, Northern Illinois, Miami, Ohio, and Louisville. I take the Purdue game out because that team was just terrible. But the offense looked better in those games than it did in the first four games, even though the competition was significantly tougher. Why? Better feel for the position. Better feel for what they're being asked to do technically, fundamentally. In year one, you're laying a foundation schematically. In year two, you're building on that. In year one, you have to teach how to play the game just as much as you got to teach them what they're supposed to do, if not more so. In year two, a lot of that technical foundation is laid. You're going to enhance it. But now it's like, okay, we know that. Now let's go here. Well, okay, but you're going to have a new quarterback. You're going to have some new receivers. Okay, counters to that. Number one is one of the receivers that is new played for Mike Brown and Mike Denbrock in 2017 or 2021, excuse me. So they know what the expectations are. The other receiver is walking into a situation that's very different than the one that Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and Jaden Harrison walked into. Whereas when those cats showed up at Notre Dame last year, hey, man, what am I supposed to do? I don't know. I've never played for these guys before. Now, Malachi Fields shows up this summer. Hey, man, what am I supposed to do? Jaden Greathouse can talk to him. Micah Gilbert can talk to him. Jordan Faison can talk to him. And Will Pauling can talk to him. KK Smith can talk to him and lead them. Now, your first-year starting quarterback doesn't always have to have the answers because his offensive line knows what they're doing. The running back can say, hey, there may be times this year where the quarterback makes a check and Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price looks at him and goes, we're supposed to check to this because now they know. And so those are all things that are going to aid the offense. So much more attention to detail. Last year's team, Shaun, on offense got by on good scheme and just every single Saturday until, I would argue, the last game of the season. I would argue up until that point, Notre Dame's dudes were always better than the dudes they were going up against on defense in every situation. That includes Texas A&M. That includes Georgia. That includes Penn State. And that includes Indiana. Their dudes. There was nobody on the other team that could hang with the running backs. And if you could put all your attention on stopping the running backs, like Georgia did, then you leave yourself vulnerable to Riley Leonard going off. And reverses are now working. And jet sweeps are working. And so that's what made this team so good. Now you give this team that's going to be just as talented, if not more so, because, yes, you lose a lot with Riley leaving as a runner and a playmaker. You lose a lot. But you're going to be better throwing the football this year. I don't care who starts a quarterback. You're going to be more dynamic at receiver this year because your young guys have more experience And I would argue strongly that a combination of Malachi Fields and Will Pauling is better than Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell. That's not, I mean, they're not good players. It's just better. Your running backs are going to be even better. Your offensive line that was super inexperienced last year, way more experienced this year. So your ability to pay attention to detail and build on the foundation that you established in year one is a big reason why Mike Denbrock was able to have success. And here's the final piece, Shaun. We focus a lot on players got to learn the new coach. They got to learn the new system. Well, here's the final piece of the puzzle. Mike Denbrock now has a full year, and he'll have a year and a half by the time we get to the fall, of learning the strengths and weaknesses of his players. Why did he change the pass game coming out of the bye week? Because now he had 2 months of data of Riley Leonard, of what he was and wasn't good at in practice, and he had 4 games of data at what Riley did or didn't read well. Now, Riley's always, hey, coach, I love it. I can do this. But now you know what he does and doesn't read well, and you can alter what you're doing. He now knows his players better. And sometimes, and that always takes a while to learn. I now have a better sense of, as a coach, of what Jeremiah Love is good at, which means I know how to build around him, but I also know areas where I can get him to improve. I know what I got in Jadarian Price, and I know how to use him, but let's also work on improving him in these other ways. I know what worked for us with Jaden Greathouse and what didn't. I know what worked for us with Jordan Faison and what didn't. I know, as the position coach, what Eli Raridan is good at and what he isn't good at. And Mike Denbrock is one of those coaches, and I've told this story about Clark Lee, Shaun. Clark Lee I was talking to Clark Lee one time, and he looks at it and he says, hey, listen, I was in a meeting one time, and he says, and we're sitting there, we're going through the players on the board. We're talking about, this kid and that kid and all these other things. And they're talking about what they do well and what they don't do well. And there's all these different things. And he said, I had to stop the meeting in a second. He goes, hey guys, hold on a second. Stop telling me what they don't do well and tell me what they do well. I don't care what they don't do well. I need to know what they do well. And I thought that was something where you're like, now that's a football coach. I know Mike Denbrock is like that. He was like that last time, and he was like that this year. Stop telling me what Riley Leonard can't do. Let's figure out what he's great at, and we're going to build the offense around that. And that's what we saw him do coming out of the Louisville game, because he now had an idea of, now you have evidence of what Riley is or isn't good at. He reads this play great in practice. He can't read it worth a darn in games. But, and so I'm going to stop calling it because he's not good at it, but he's really good at this. That's what good coaches do. And that's what we're going to see from Mike Denbrock in year 2. And why I say that, and I don't say why I think, I say we're going to see it because he did it at Notre Dame in 15. He did it at Cincinnati in 18. He did it at LSU in 23. You have no evidence to tell me I'm wrong. I have tons of evidence to tell me that I'm right. And that is that when Mike Denbrock and when his players have a better sense of what he's doing and he has a better sense of what they're doing and they can build on the foundation they laid in year 1, you see a significant improvement in performance by his offense across the board. And that's why I'm excited. And that's how it works, Shaun. That's why it gets better, is that right there.
And the fact that he just has some really talented players. He's had some talented players. Yeah, you 2 wide receivers he had, and what Michael Young in Notre Dame transfer was in the slot form. I forget the local kid here out of Chicago that's in the NFL with the Colts right now.
Was it Taylor or was it Scott?
Scott was a freshman. I think Scott was a freshman at that point in time. I'm talking about the big kid. He's a Chicago kid. He's like 6'3". I forget his name. Hopefully the chat can hit us up and let us know.
You talking about Tyler Scott?
No, Tyler Scott wasn't.
You talking about Alec Pierce?
Alec Pierce. Yeah, Tyler Scott was the young guy.
I didn't know Alec Pierce was from the Chicago area. I didn't know
he's from the Chicago area. Yeah, so even looking at those skill position guys that he had, he didn't
have any of those guys. Here's the thing, Shaun. He didn't have any of those guys in 2018. I mean, those guys were all 20 and 21. Like if you look at his 2000, you look at his 18 offense. Yeah, any of those guys. his leading receiver with 56 catches, 782 yards, and 9 touchdowns in year 2 at Cincinnati was Khalil Lewis. You ever heard of Khalil Lewis? Neither is anybody else in the chat. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing is he didn't even have the talent level he had in 19 and 20 when you started to see Alec Pierce come out in 19. You saw Josh Wiley, Michael Young, Trey Tucker, Tyler Scott, Leonard Taylor.
That was my point that I was getting ready to get to. Is like, as he got the talent, then you saw what he was able to do, because talent always makes coaching look better. Like coaching, great coaching is great coaching, but you put great coaching with great talent, it's just a natural and organic connection and relationship. And so now, as much, that's why you love hearing, and I don't want to get into like tidbits and everything, but you love some of the things that you're hearing coming out of practice be about certain guys, especially in the wide receiver room. It's like, okay, what will eventually be in the room once we get into the fall. If we're hearing things about this group of guys, then you really start to feel like, okay, he really has the requisite pieces, because we already know what the running back room is like. We pray that injury stays away from the tight end room, because if there are no injuries, the tight end room is going to be productive. And then we expect the offensive line, just being healthier, to be better, because there's plenty of talent there. Notre Dame is a more talented and deeper roster. That by itself is going to lend itself to Notre Dame progressing offensively. So, you know, you put that connected to what we just pointed out with everything connected to Mike Denbrock's offense in the second year and what is shown and what it has historically done. That's why you absolutely, like, all of the evidence. We could talk about theories. We could talk about ND PTSD with offense and quarterbacks and all of this other stuff. Let the record show that the guy that's going to be calling the plays has a history of his offense vastly improving in year 2.
Different groups.
Yes.
And very different circumstances. You can't say, well, he's like you, and I knew what you meant to say early on. It's like, okay, you're going into year 2 of Everett Golson in 2015. You're going into year 2 of whoever at Cincinnati, and you're going into year 2 of Jayden Daniels at LSU. Well, you can't. It's hard to compare those because you're going into year 1 of whoever the quarterback's going to be in Notre Dame. Cool, fair. But that wasn't the circumstance of 2 of his last 3 schools. They did have new guys at positions. They did have new running backs or new. I mean, yes, Notre Dame had a new receiver in Will Fuller in 15, but let's not forget Mike Denbrock is the guy that oversaw him going from 6 catches as a freshman as his position coach to 70 catches and 1,000 yards as a sophomore. Because remember, Mike Denbrock was on staff at Notre Dame prior to 2014. So he was still Will Fuller's position coach. And then you see that big jump that he had. So no matter how you spin it, he's played a huge role in that. I had all that talent at LSU. Yeah, they had that talent in 2023 as well, or 22 as well. And a lot of that talent they also had in 2021, with the exception of Jayden Daniels, number 1. Number 2, nobody thought Jayden Daniels 23 was who Jayden Daniels was prior to 2023. We can all look back now and be like, hey, man, you had Jayden Daniels that year. But who thought Jayden Daniels was going to do that going into that season? Let's be honest, LSU fans. A lot of y'all wanted Garrett Nussmeier to start in 2023. Let's be real about that. There was a loud contingent of LSU fans that thought that Garrett Nussmeier was going to push Jayden Daniels for the starting quarterback job, and some people wanted it.
You remember the buzz after that SEC championship loss? You remember when Garrett Nussmeier came in, put up some touchdowns? Yeah, see, don't run from it. Don't run from it. That buzz was there.
Yep.
That buzz was there.
Well, yeah, he did well because you had Jayden Daniels. Y'all didn't think that going into the season. Let's be honest about that. So who gets credit for that? The guy running the offense gets some. Now, the other thing I like too, Shaun, is this isn't just Denbrock with a new staff. He, in that turnaround in 2006, 17 to 18, I believe Gino Guidugli was with him on that staff as well. I believe. But more importantly, Gino's first year at Cincinnati was 2017. So 2018, he moved to quarterbacks. But my point is, 2 of the coaches he's working with now, he's worked with before. they coached with him. So like Mike Brown knows what Mike Denbrock wants. They coach together. Gino Guidugli knows what Mike Denbrock wants. They've coached together. And the fact that you only have one coach leaving from last year's staff, I think that overall staff continuity leads to it for me as well, Shaun, that it's not just Mike Denbrock's responsibility. It's now year 3 of Joe Rudolph. It's now year 2 of Mike Brown. It's now year 3 of Gino Guidugli. It's now year 2 of Mike Denbrock. And the only addition is at running back is I think one of the easier positions to make a fast transition as a coach, for being honest. And number 2, you replaced a great coach with another great coach. You lost a great coach and you replaced him with a great coach. So I think it's just the staff around him gives me confidence that you're not teaching new technique to your offensive linemen because you have a new offensive line coach. You're not teaching new route technique because you have a new receivers coach. It's all going to be, let's keep building, let's keep growing. And I think that's a big part of what kind of goes into this as well, which leads to that excitement, which means, Shaun, as we said, you want to know why I'm excited about this offense going into year 3 or year 2 of Mike Denbrock? It's because of that. It's because of not only the talent that Notre Dame returns, but the success that Mike Denbrock has had getting this type of jump in year 2. And so that's why I think a lot now, the only question for me now, Shaun, is how big of a jump will it be? That's going to be the question.
That goes back to the numbers that I presented with the efficiency, right? I think we go back to his second year. The biggest jump, if I'm not mistaken from the numbers you put out, there were bigger jumps in the individual run game numbers. And that might just be based upon where Cincinnati, if you average it out, the Cincinnati might skew that a little bit versus, and the LSU situation might skew that a little bit. But I think there's a considerable more increase in yards per game in the run game than in the pass game. Yeah. If I saw that correctly.
Yeah, because Cincinnati actually, so it actually kind of balances out pass game wise, Shaun, because you had LSU made a, what'd that be, 68.6 or 69.6 improvement at LSU in yards, but you went down 20, what would that be, 27 or so, around 27 for Notre Dame, and then you only had a 2.6 improvement at Cincinnati. That's what say the yards per play average works. The run game is where you had consistent good jumps everywhere.
Right. So now, that for me lets you know at the core, because we could sit up here and look at Jaden Daniel and look at the improvement of Desmond Ridder. You know, we could talk about the early returns on the quarterbacks that he had while he was at Notre Dame. But the truth of the matter is, at the heart of the matter, this man wants to run the ball. Like he wants to run the
balanced.
Ball. Yes,
that's the thing, Shaun. He wants to be balanced. Right. And that's what you see.
That now you understand where the efficiency comes from, because improving run game definitely impacts efficiency and the passing plays. And when you call them, you've been a play caller, B. When you call it, why you call it. You pointed out, man, we talk about this story all the time. You guys are in the playoff game. You went to the coach and was like, yo, we need to call this play, right? And it went for a touchdown. Like, when you're an efficient offense, it helps so much with the feel of the game.
Right.
Week to week, and knowing when to call something. What's the right time? Because when you call it, you want it to go. Every play is called to go for a touchdown. That's one thing I learned. Every play in the playbook is called to go, hey, we run this right, we should score, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that, but most play callers, that's their mindset. So now when you make these calls in the passing game, coming off a very effective run game, you get the big plays, especially if you have the talent that can add run after catch like he had at LSU. That's what he had at LSU. He had the ability to call plays, and then he had the talent to take the play call and turn it from being a 5-yard game, 10-yard game into 30, 40, 50, things of that nature. So all things work together, and I think that's what we're going to see. That's why it's going to happen.
It's like you talk about play calling, and I remember a circumstance in my coaching career, and I believe I've shared this story before, but when I was at Duquesne, we were on the road playing a team. We had a big lead, hit some big plays. They were coming back, and we needed a score. We needed a touchdown to put the game away, and we're 3rd and goal at about the 6-yard line, and so we call timeout. And when our head coach would kind of get in these big play situations, he would ask us all during the timeout, "What do you guys want to do here?" He'd always start the O-line coach, then go to the quarterback's coach, get to the running back's coach, and he'd always ask me last. And so we're in this 3rd and goal. It's a 6-yard line. I think it's a 6. And he asked the O-line, he's like, I think we need to throw a fade to Michael Warfield, who's our stud receiver. And then our quarterback's coach, who would always agree with whatever the O-line coach said, yeah. The running back coach said the same thing. I said, what about you, Driscoll? So we need to run a draw to Mike Hilliard, our running back. He goes, why? I said, because everybody in the stadium thinks we're going to throw a fade route to Michael Warfield. So they're gonna think that too. And we called a draw and we walked in. But like that only worked because we could also block well up front in the run game. Because I had a running back that I knew we get him the ball, he can score too. Now I'm the receivers coach. Of course I would want to throw a fade to Michael, but I'm trying to win a football game here. But you can't do that if you're like, but my running back runs a 4.7 and my line can't block, their grandmothers. So we can't do that. That's where that balance piece comes into play. And that's what ultimately Mike Denbrock wants. And I think this team's going to have a better shot. And I want to point something out. Our resident LSU fan said, well, people didn't think that Joe Burrow was going to be good in year 2 either. I mean, just point something out real quick. First of all, nobody saw the jump that Joe Burrow made in year 2. But there's one person in this show for sure that absolutely had Joe Burrow breaking out in year 2, who picked LSU to be in the college football playoff in 2019. So I did see that coming. I did not see Jaden Daniels having a breakout year in year 2. I did not call that one. And that's a huge credit to Jaden, who's now built on that and had a great year as a rookie in the NFL. But, that's what I'm saying is like every situation's different. You could see the LSU offense in 19 was held back by coaching. And the Joe Brady hire was going to turn it loose. That wasn't the case with what Denbrock stepped into. And so that's the point. And as I said, nobody saw the type of breakout Joe Burrow had. Nobody saw that. What I'm saying is I absolutely saw Joe Burrow making a big jump, which was going to make that LSU team really, really good. I didn't see them winning the title. I didn't see him having the monster numbers he had. But you could see the tools were there. And then it got developed. But that's what good coaching does, Shaun. Right? It is Joe Burrow didn't just all by himself go from what he did in year 1 to year 2 at LSU. Same with Jaden Daniels. Those guys all had to work as players, but they had to be put in position from a coaching standpoint to get to that point. And that's what has me excited. I think the talent all around is going to be better. I think they're going to be going to a system that they know better. And you have a coach and a coaching staff, for the most part, that have a long track record, especially the offensive coordinator, of taking year 1 to year 2 and getting that group to play at a higher level. And that's what has me excited. We're going to go into part 3 here in a minute. But before we do, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review if you're listening via podcast platform. But as always, Shaun, the best way to stay in touch with what we're doing at Irish Breakdown remains signing up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Insured by Big, my guy, the LSU fan, is a member of our premium board. He will post on there. And Archer was on there for a while. So you don't have to be a Notre Dame fan there, but our board is primarily talking about Notre Dame football, but we also talk about college football topics as well. So you want to make sure you sign up for that at boards.irishbreakdown.com.